Quentin Tarantino has built a career on fearless filmmaking, blood-soaked revenge, unforgettable dialogue, and bold risks. But behind all the critical acclaim and cult status lies one scene he now wishes he never shot, and one woman he can't forget because of it. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a moment that nearly ended a friendship, shattered trust, and left a permanent scar on his legacy. Before the fallout, they were unstoppable. Quentin Tarantino and Uma Thurman weren't just director and actress. They were creative soulmates. When Pulp Fiction exploded onto the scene in 1994, Thurman's portrayal of Mia Wallace became iconic. But few people knew just how involved she was behind the scenes. Tarantino once called her his muse, and together, they shaped not just characters but entire stories. Their bond only deepened with Kill Bill. Tarantino didn't just cast Uma, he wrote the role of the bride specifically for her. It was personal. He gave her creative control over the character's tone, movements, even her signature yellow jumpsuit. In interviews, he compared their collaboration to telepathy. She trusted him. He pushed her. And together, they built something unforgettable. But the closeness that made their work electric would also be the reason things got complicated. Because when you trust someone that deeply, a single mistake can feel like betrayal. And what happened next would test everything between them. During the final days of shooting Kill Bill Volume 2, Tarantino had one more shot in mind. A fast-driving scene through a narrow stretch of dusty Mexican road. It was supposed to be simple. Uma Thurman behind the wheel, hair blowing in the wind, racing toward revenge. But she wasn't comfortable. Thurman says she warned the team. The car felt unsafe. She'd been told it had issues. She asked for a stunt driver. But instead, Tarantino insisted she'd do it herself. He reassured her, told her it was all fine. According to Uma, he even pressured her, saying the car needed to go a certain speed to look good on camera.
And director Quentin Tarantino. She told Weinstein sexually assaulted her, but in a separate claim, she says Tarantino coerced her into driving that car that she believed to be faulty.
So, she got in. She drove. The camera rolled. And just seconds later, she crashed. But the real damage wasn't just physical. It was how what came next nearly destroyed everything they'd built. The impact slammed Thurman's head against the seat and twisted her body violently. She suffered a concussion, damage to her knees, pain that lingered for years. But when the dust settled, something else became clear. The footage of the crash was locked away. Miramax, the studio behind the film, reportedly refused to hand it over. For years, Uma tried to get a copy, not for publicity, but for accountability. And all that time, Tarantino stayed mostly silent. Fans had no idea. The media didn't touch it. It was buried. Their friendship suffered. The trust that once defined their collaboration, gone. She didn't speak publicly about what happened until 2018, over a decade later, when she revealed everything in a stunning interview. And that's when the world found out what Tarantino had been hiding, and how he finally tried to make it right. For years, Uma Thurman carried the weight of what happened. The physical pain, the betrayal, the silence. But in 2018, something changed. In a raw and emotional interview with the New York Times, she finally spoke out. She revealed the crash, the pressure, the years of frustration. The world was stunned. But even more surprising, Tarantino didn't deny it. In fact, he admitted he'd made a terrible mistake. And he went a step further. He personally tracked down the crash footage, fought to get it released, and handed it to Thurman himself. He said the incident was one of the biggest regrets of his life. And in a moment of humility rarely seen in Hollywood, he took full responsibility. I told her it was safe. I was wrong, he said. The two eventually reconciled. Not perfectly, not instantly, but enough for Thurman to say publicly that Tarantino had done the right thing in the end. But while the two of them were quietly making peace, the rest of Hollywood was just starting to catch fire. Once the footage was out and Uma's story was public, the reaction was explosive. Fans were outraged. Industry insiders began questioning how something like this could have been hidden for so long. And more importantly, how many other actors had been pushed into dangerous situations just to get the shot. This wasn't just a Tarantino problem anymore. It was part of a bigger reckoning in Hollywood, one where the power dynamic between directors and actors was being torn apart and re-examined. The conversation shifted. People started demanding safer sets, clearer boundaries, and real consequences when things went wrong. For many, the crash became a symbol of what happens when power goes unchecked, even in the name of art. And while the industry was grappling with its own reflection, Tarantino was doing something he rarely does: publicly admitting fault. For decades, Quentin Tarantino built his reputation on control. He was the kind of director who knew every camera angle before the actors arrived on set. Every line of dialogue was carefully chosen, every scene calculated. But when the truth about the Kill Bill crash came to light, that image of control shattered. When Uma Thurman finally spoke out in 2018, Tarantino didn't run. He didn't blame the studio. He didn't say she misunderstood. Instead, he did something Hollywood rarely sees. He owned it. In an emotional response, Tarantino admitted he'd made a devastating error in judgment. He had told her the car was safe. He had insisted she do the shot. And when the crash happened, he'd failed to realize just how serious it really was. "It's the biggest regret of my life," he confessed. Not just because of the injuries she suffered, but because of how deeply it fractured their relationship. But what made his admission stand out wasn't just the words. It was the way he backed them up. Tarantino personally went back into the vault, fought to get the footage released, and gave it to Thurman, knowing full well it might hurt his career. In a town built on image, that kind of vulnerability is rare. And it wasn't for PR. There was no new movie to promote, no spin, just an aging director finally reckoning with a decision that nearly destroyed one of the most important collaborations of his life. But even as Tarantino tried to make it right, the ripple effect of that one moment was just beginning to spread across Hollywood. When the footage was released, it didn't just trigger outrage, it forced the film industry to look in the mirror. Suddenly, one of the most respected directors of his generation had become the center of a conversation about safety, power, and accountability. Fans were shocked. Critics dissected the footage frame by frame, and industry veterans began asking the uncomfortable questions. How often are actors pressured into doing their own stunts? How many accidents go unreported because the cameras kept rolling? For decades, film sets had operated on a dangerous myth that the pursuit of art justified pushing boundaries. That directors knew best. That pain was just part of the process, but Tarantino's mistake made it impossible to ignore the cost anymore. In the years that followed, productions started changing their protocols. Studios invested more in stunt safety. Actors were given more autonomy and more protections. The crash became more than just a footnote in Tarantino's career. It became a case study, a warning, and for Tarantino himself, the shadow of that day in Mexico never fully lifted. Even as he continued to make movies, the incident followed him. Not as scandal, but as a scar. In interviews, you can hear it in his voice when the topic comes up. Regret, but also reflection. That crash altered the way he works, the way he leads, and the way he sees the line between creative vision and human responsibility. Because no matter how iconic Kill Bill became, there's a scene behind the scenes that still lingers louder than anything on screen. And the most haunting part? Millions have watched the movie without ever knowing what really happened when the cameras stopped rolling. In Quentin Tarantino's world, nothing is ever simple. Every frame is layered, every line of dialogue charged with tension. But the real story, the one that never made it into the script, is far more complicated than any movie twist he's ever written. One choice, one scene, one crash, and everything changed. The Kill Bill incident wasn't just about a director pushing an actress too far. It was about power, about trust, about what happens when artistic ambition blinds someone to the very real consequences unfolding around them. For Uma Thurman, it was trauma, both physical and emotional, that she carried in silence for over a decade. For Tarantino, it was a lesson learned too late. And for Hollywood, it was a wake-up call that forced an entire industry to rethink how it treats its actors, its crews, and its responsibilities. Tarantino may be remembered for his iconic films, for reinventing genres, for creating scenes that audiences will never forget. But behind that legacy is a single moment that changed the way he directs, the way he leads, and the way we all view the line between genius and recklessness. Because sometimes, the most unforgettable scene is the one the audience was never supposed to see.